This debate is on a bill the unicameral is considering called the Red Flag Law. This law, which has been passed by 14 states, allows a variety of persons, even the person you're dating or have dated, don't let your wives know that, to go to court and declare you to be dangerous and have any weapons you own taken away from you. The issue will be debated tonight by Sarpy County Sheriff Captain Scott Krieger on my right, and who's testified for the bill in the Legislative Committee, and Rod Moeller, Director of Government Affairs for the Nebraska Firearm Owners Association. Sheriff Krieger is a graduate of the FBI Academy and a former Marine. Needless to say, many consider the law a violation of the Second Amendment to our Constitution. They feel that most judges are against the ownership of guns and will be more than willing to remove them. Plus, the person you have dated or dated may have ulterior motives in declaring you dangerous. So this ought to be a very interesting debate. Our format will be 5 minutes for opening statement, 5 minutes for rebuttal, and then 5 minutes for either side, followed by questions. But I would like to start the debate, and I'll start with Sheriff Krieger. If you just do a quick introduction, a little bit about yourself, whatever you'd like to say, and then Mr. Moeller, if you would do the same thing.
To start with, my name's Kevin, not Scott.
I apologize.
That's all right. That's all right, Sheriff.
Scott, we have Scott Krieger, my brain transposed.
I am not the sheriff in Sarpy County. I'm a captain. I work for the sheriff's office, so the sheriff is my boss. And I've been with the sheriff's office for 32 years. During that time, I have worked in every division we have. Currently, I'm assigned to our investigations division. I oversee our criminal and narcotics investigations, also our warrants unit. And I've greatly enjoyed my time there. I spent 20 years on our tactical team and enjoyed that tremendously. As I don't know if it was Lee said, but I was with the Marine Corps prior to getting into law enforcement. I was in the Marine Corps Reserves for 5 years, so spent the last 30 plus years of my life in public service. So I was happy to have the opportunity to come here tonight and be invited by Lee and to talk to Ron a little bit, just ahead of time to talk to him. So thank you all for the opportunity.
Well, my name is Rod Moeller. I'm a firearms instructor. Have spent the past 8 years or so active as a board member of the Nebraska Firearm Owners Association, which is a grassroots organization protecting our Second Amendment rights based here in Nebraska. So we're focused on city and state level issues. We don't get involved in the national level. Served for president as 3 years, and then a couple of years after that, director of government affairs. So I'm familiar with the legislative process down in Lincoln, having spent a good 6-7 years down there working with the senators down in Lincoln.
Thank you very much. We'll start with opening remarks for 5 minutes, and Captain will let you go first.
Okay. Up until I met Rod 2 minutes ago, and he said, "Do you know the format?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." So as far as 5 minutes of opening remarks, I don't have 5 minutes probably specifically prepared. I can talk for a minute or 30, depending on whatever you would like to hear. But I'll tell you the background of how I got into this particular subject. In Sarpy County, we have been very involved with school safety. And as we started to look at school safety and how our schools in Sarpy County respond to an active shooter type of incident, we wanted to make sure all of our schools were doing the same thing on the same page. So in 2014, they all adopted standard response protocol. As we moved from that, it was reunification. And after an event like that, how do we get those kids back to their parents? Because we've all seen on television where it's just a panic of kids and parents, and it's not structured, and it's handled very poorly, and it is a lot of stress on the children and the parents. And so it needs to be handled better. So we've worked with our schools in Sarpy County on reunification. As we continued down that road, our 4 superintendents from our districts wholly in Sarpy County asked us, those are great, those things are good, but they're all after the fact. Somebody's already come into our school and shot up our school. What do we do on the front side? how do we prevent something like this from happening? So we looked at threat assessment, and we put together a threat assessment team of mental health providers, law enforcement, schools, probation, county attorney's office, and trying to identify people prior to an event happening and coming up with a safety plan as part of that. As we've continued to have more and more active shooter type incidents in schools and businesses across the country, particularly after Parkland, Florida, when there were so many opportunities to interact and interdict the shooter ahead of time, and they were dropped. Partly because this law enforcement agency didn't talk with that one, the schools had information and they don't talk to probation, and nobody ever puts these information pieces together. And it was the exact same thing that happened at Virginia Tech, if you remember when that event happened a few years back. Everybody protects their own information and nobody wants to share it. So by sharing the information, we're able to come up with a plan ahead of time to stop, interdict. As part of that, one of the things that we found was other states have something called red flag laws. And in Nebraska, LB 58 was introduced this year, and it's called an extreme risk protection order. And other states already have this in place, and it allows either essentially a close family member or somebody with an intimate relationship, and it's laid out in the bill itself, or law enforcement to petition the court, and then a judge decides whether or not to issue that extreme risk protection order. If this person is deemed unsafe to themselves or somebody else, either through violence or suicide or psychosis, then the judge is able to issue a writ to tell that person to turn over any weapons they have. If they fail to do that, law enforcement then takes those weapons for a determined amount of time until the judge says, give it back. And as part of that, if it's a suicidal psychosis kind of an issue, they're mandated in there to make sure that person gets some mental health treatment as well. So that is the idea behind LB 58 and what we were trying to do with that. I understand the other side of the issue. I'm a gun owner myself. I've been in favor of the United States Constitution, and I spent my entire adult life protecting it. So I certainly understand the Second Amendment and protecting the Second Amendment, and I understand that the Second Amendment is paramount in our culture and how we live our lives. But on the other side, we have to protect especially the vulnerable children. If there's somebody that's out there in the midst of a mental crisis, then I think we owe it to them and to our community to do something, if we can, ahead of time, to take those weapons at least for that amount of time. And it doesn't prohibit them from owning them in the future, it's just during that time. So I have no idea where I'm at on time. So
13 seconds over.
Oh,
Close enough.
I didn't know if you were going to give me a high sign or just cut me off.
We give you a little bit.
You can have a bonus 13 seconds then. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Mr. Moeller, then, if you'd like to rebut, please.
All right. Red flag laws are dangerous. These laws ignore the tenets of our legal system. A legal system that has got a foundation on protecting our rights. The basis of red flag laws ignore that foundation. We should remember that the American legal system is based on the rights of the individual and the protection of those rights. Individual liberty is the core of our American society. Individual liberty is defined as the right of a person to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it is the government's job to ensure that these rights, not to ensure the rights and not to constrain or destroy them. Protection of our rights is the foundation of our Constitution. Our doctrine of presumed innocence has been the cornerstone of the American justice system. These protections include a right to trial, a right to face our accuser, preserving individual rights until there has been a conviction based upon evidence, not mere accusations, not a petition for hearing after the fact. It is supposed to be difficult for our government to restrict the rights of its citizens, and this is by design. Protection of rights is so important that our Constitution places a burden on the government to prove that a crime has been committed. Among these rights, the defendant has a right to legal counsel and the full array of due process protections for either a criminal or a civil commitment hearing, including the right to testify, to present evidence, and to cross-examine witnesses. The Sixth Amendment provides that an accused person has a right to confront the witnesses against them. This cannot happen if the defendant is not present. This cannot happen if the defendant is not represented by counsel. Further, these red flag proceedings blur the line between civil and criminal legal actions. A person that has committed no crime somehow wants a judicial order and a knock on the door by the police. That's if they're lucky. It could be a no-knock situation. Red flag laws are designed to allow guns to be removed from one's home based upon a claim that the person is dangerous to themselves or to others. These claims can come from anyone you've lived with or had a relationship with, as well as law enforcement. And how is the claim of a relationship proven? There is no opportunity to defend against those claims in court before the removal of firearms. There is no demand the government prove their case with the normal burden of proof. It is only persuasion based upon the preponderance of evidence. The opportunity to defend against these claims are denied until after the fact. Who believes that going in front of a judge after they've made a decision will result in that same judge changing their position? Appeals of convictions go to another court for a reason. Red flag laws allow the use of fear by an individual as a basis for removing an individual's rights, or the claim of fear, real or not. Fear is not justification. Fear is not evidence. Fear is not proof. Fear is often without merit, sometimes irrational. Red flag laws will be misused. They are designed in a way that allows them to be used for retaliation and spite. Perhaps that is not the intent, but supporters ignore that very realistic result. Divorce can be messy. I don't know how many people have gone through one. If you haven't, great. You probably have a family member, a close friend, or a coworker that has, and you've probably heard stories about how bad they can get. The sheriff's deputy told me about his divorce, where his wife, because of bitterness, said, well, I'm just going to file a protection order against you, and you won't be able to have guns anymore. And he just casually said, well, if you do that, I won't have a source of income to pay child support. And she changed her tune pretty quickly. But that isn't necessarily the case. Law enforcement's one of the few careers where they would be able to use that type of an argument. Supporters claim there is due process within these red flag laws, but that process is to appeal the decision after it has been made, and that is not due process. What about situations where these safety concerns are valid? There are processes in place today that allows real dangers to be addressed. If there is evidence of an actual threat, actual violence, there is cause for charges and a legal process to follow. There are scenarios where police may place somebody into protective custody. There's a process today to deal with those situations. If the intent really is for the safety of individuals in our communities, why are firearms the only items that are included in these red flag laws? What about the more commonly used items of assault? How will removing firearms prevent the use of stabbing, bludgeoning, suffocation, strangulation, which are more frequently used than firearms and causing harm against others? In closing, we cannot allow fears to drive dangerous changes to our legal system. We need to be vigilant in the protection of individual freedom. We need to keep the rights of the individual as the most important protection.
If you'd like to rebut, give you 5 minutes.
Sure. A couple of points that Rod?
Yes.
Made. One of the things he said was talking about ignoring the legal system and a lack of due process. There is due process built into the system. You know, I can't, as a law enforcement officer, arbitrarily go and remove somebody's weapons. I have to file something. It has to go in front of a judge. The judge makes the determination then And it is ex parte, the parson is not there present in the courtroom for that first hearing. But there is an opportunity for him to come back in front of a judge then and have a court hearing, very similar to what we do with protection orders now in any kind of a case that we currently have with our protection orders, which are already part of the law. The judge can make a ruling at the front and then schedule a hearing down the road. If the evidence isn't supported, then the judge would reverse his decision. So due process is in there. It's not an arbitrary decision on a judge to just remove somebody's weapons from him. And one of the things he mentioned was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which I think, I would hope, everybody in the room would say are the foundations that our country is built on. But the very first one, I can only assume then is the paramount one, and that's why they listed it first, is life. And you have a right to pursue happiness, and if shooting guns makes you happy, and I know there are a lot of people that does. I have some very good friends on the department. One of them is a nationally ranked shooter. He's very, very good at what he does. And other people, I was talking to Mr. Terry ahead of time, we were talking about sport shooting. To me, shooting is something I'm very good at, but it's a tool I use for work. It's not something I go out and enjoy doing, but I do it and I'm good at it. Some people, I understand, pursue it because it makes them happy. But if we're going to focus on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I think we need to focus on life, which is the first one that they listed. And if there's something that we can do that potentially is going to keep somebody from walking into an elementary school and killing 26 kids, as happened in Newtown, Connecticut, if there's something in place ahead of time that somebody is dealing with a mental illness and we can do something about that, I think it's in everybody's best interest that we do that. Without giving you too much information, I'll tell you about a recent case that we had of a young man, younger than me, in his 30s. He was in his 30s, and we saw through a series of incidents in his life that he was interacting with the police, he was interacting with his neighbors, he had been arrested on a couple of charges, but you could see that there was a system of things happening in his life, and he was losing control of those things. He was a former military person, and he was served with the mental health commitment. Because of the mental health system that we have in the state of Nebraska, and I can only imagine that the rest of the country is the same way, we don't have enough mental health beds for people. We take them to emergency room, they sit in an emergency room, maybe they see a doctor right away. In this case, he saw a doctor over a television screen, like through Skype in another state. He was at the hospital, he went in about 6 p.m., by 11 p.m. he was out, and he wasn't a danger to himself, that's what the doctor said. Last Monday morning, he left notes all over his house, he left cards for his 2-year-old son and said, this is for his 3rd birthday, this is for his 4th birthday, this is for his 5th. He noted things in his garage. Give him this on this birthday, give him this. And then he took the rifle that he had and he went out in a field and he killed himself. And had this been in place, you know, would he have used a knife? Perhaps, and killed himself another way. But certainly he wouldn't have had an opportunity to use that weapon. And for somebody like the Parkland school shooter, the Sandy Hook shooter, people at Virginia Tech that we know are involved in mental health issues as well, it would be an opportunity to interdict those people ahead of time and perhaps come up with some safety plan to keep them from taking the action that they're hoping to take.
Thank you. Rod, I'll give you 5 minutes.
Well, we're in agreement on a couple of things. I do agree that we do have some problems in our society that need to be addressed, dealing with mental illness, dealing with violence, and certainly can't argue that we do have issues with a lack of assistance and resources for people with mental illness. This has been an issue in our society for a long time. We also, as you noted out, have a problem with agencies not communicating. I think that's something that we can addressed without passing another law. We also have problems with people recognizing or addressing some of these noted issues. We have people apparently trouble recognizing some of the troubled individuals, or at least doing something with it. I can't tell you how many stories that I've read about with these active shooter situations where they've talked to people that knew them. They're like, oh yeah, I've known this guy was crazy. I knew this guy had issues. People have known it for years. So having a process that allows you to deal with that immediately, if that would have been taken care of a couple of years before the shooting occurred, we could have gone through a process that took a few days or a week. Where I do disagree, however, is the due process piece. I understand what you're talking about, an ex parte decision. But I think there's an important distinction that we need to draw. And in the scenarios that you present, that I accept, are the law enforcement encounters. The red flag bills are designed in such a way that so many people other than law enforcement are also able to make a claim. And that's where we have a severe lack of due process. I trust most law enforcement to make good judgment decisions as to when responding to an incident, whether somebody may need to come into emergency protective custody or not. I don't trust the actual individuals, family members, former lovers, whomever, that could do this. I don't know if you've seen the antics used by some of the gun-hating UNL professors that are part of the anti-gun lobby in Nebraska. They're the same folks that have harassed gun owners, defaced homes and offices of politicians they hate. I wouldn't put it past them to use red flag laws to lay false claims against known gun owners. They hate someone enough to fly out of state to vandalize their house. What's to stop them from filing a false claim against me or Patricia or my wife or anyone else that's known in the firearms community? The bill allows law enforcement to file a petition for an order to take guns away. But it also allows lots of other people, any family member, no matter how distantly related, current and former spouses, there's no time limit, any person they have ever dated, anyone who's ever been a roommate. We have processes to take away guns from convicted felons, accused felons while awaiting trial, domestic violence offenders, people subject to domestic violence protection order or harassment protection order, people who are seriously mentally ill, dishonorably discharged former military members, and people who have renounced their citizenship, and illegal aliens. The existing court procedures are designed to protect our constitutional rights. The red flag bills open this up way too broad to allow for abuse.
Thank you very much. We'll go to now our second round of rebuttal, and back to you, Captain.
Okay.
Or we could just do questions.
We can use questions.
You want to jump into questions?
I have one point of, it's not even a rebuttal of what he said, it's just a statistic. The Secret Service did a study a couple of years back of all of the active shooter incidents up through 2013, and they found in over 80% of those that somebody knew ahead of time that this person was planning it. And some of those are not malicious, crazy people. They are just horrible people that are going to go in and do whatever they're going to do. And they're getting their guns legally from their dad, or they bought them, or whatever it is. But people already know that these events are going to happen. And so we need to broaden our scope of who we're talking to get that information in. I thank Rod for his confidence in law enforcement and trusting law enforcement. And I understand exactly what you're saying of, hey, my ex-wife, and I wasn't the deputy he was talking to earlier. My wife still loves me. She's at home waiting for me right now. I certainly understand that a vindictive ex-spouse could come up with something. but they still have to present it to a judge. It still has to be proven in court, and if they're lying about it, then they're going to be held themselves criminally liable for falsification of that court document. So there are checks and balances in place for that.
Before we jump into questions, I'm going to exercise my right as MC to ask one first. Do you want to do any rebuttal to the rebuttal, Eric?
To the rebuttal?
I'll let you go first.
My only comment is on that 80% of school shootings where someone knew that they were planning it. I mean, I think that our process is, as long as they communicate to somebody, I understand law enforcement taking action at that point, because there is a credible threat of that. I just think it's an important distinction between that and a lot of the failings of what the red flag bills introduce. The other thing is, I will point out that if you file a false claim, that in this particular bill, it's class 3 misdemeanor, no matter how many times you do it, which I don't think is severe enough myself for the impact it can have on another individual.
Well, at the beginning, and I'll come to questions, but we had two different statements, and I don't remember who said what. But first we said close relations, so a wife, a brother, sister, a son, a daughter, someone you've dated, and then we expanded it and we said your former roommate, your roommate could do this. So whether you've opened this up to saying, look, my neighbor down the street, that I don't know him very well, but he says a lot of things that disturb me and upset me, and I think the court needs to have a look at him, or my dad, whoever. Does this legislation, have the court delve into that, whatever that relationship is, me as neighbor bringing a charge against the guy down the block? It doesn't make any difference that I'm a guy down the block or a son. Can I do this against anybody that I have a legitimate concern about? And then the court decides that my concern is a class 3 misdemeanor and I'm doing it maliciously? Or would the court say, yeah, he's got no relationship with this person, but he has a legitimate reason to have brought this charge?
The way that I read, the way I understand the legislative bill, and if you read it differently, please correct me, but you have to have an intimate relationship somehow. And there's a whole paragraph in there specifically of what that means. And it's similar to domestic violence. It's the same wording in there. But the guy that lives down the street cannot go and file one of these against you. I mean, unless you were former lovers and you moved down the street, I suppose.
That's where I was curious where the relationship is. If I can do it against anybody I've heard make a scary statement, and I think the gee whiz, of course, need to look at him, or that intimate relationship that it's my spouse or it's my parents.
And in that case, I would encourage you to call law enforcement and say, hey, you know what, there's a guy down the block and these are the things that he said, these are the things, and then we would start an investigation, and then we potentially could petition the court for this, and that's why there's two avenues for this.
That's what I was curious.
But again, we would have to present evidence. You would most likely be called, to court to testify, to say, these are the things that I heard him say, these are the things that he's done, etc.
Lee Terry.
I'm not so worried about my ex-girlfriend as I am about a bunch of federal judges that are against guns being in the hands of private citizens anyway. Isn't that a real danger?
Well, number one, this is a state law, so federal judges wouldn't have anything to do with this in particular.
Any judges.
I have to trust our criminal justice system. It's better than anyone else in the world, and so I understand that we have people with D's behind their names that appoint judges, and we have people with R's behind their name that appoint judges. But I still think it's the best system we have, and it's better than anybody else in the world, and I have to trust it. And I personally have spent my entire life putting people in that system, and I trust that a judge, regardless of how he votes, is going to do what's right up there.
Does that worry you, judges, the type of judges?
Well, I agree with Kevin that we do have the best system in the world, and it is flawed. and we have to just accept that, you know, nothing is ever going to be perfect in the world. But it does concern me that I would prefer to keep as many people who are not violent criminal actors out of the court system as possible. People who are dealing with a personal issue, I don't think needs to be in that type of situation.
I think you had a question second?
I'm 25 years retiree from civilian fire department. And we had a case, and I'm sure you guys handled it, was a guy come home from flying 60, 80 hours in an aircraft, and he walked in the house, started pouring like a scotch or whatever, and the wife said something kind of off color to him. He went to his bedroom and shot himself twice in the head. Turned around and looked at her and said, "Huh, I didn't do a good job," and shot himself again. He lived 9 hours after his surgery. So being mentally unstable, I would say you can never actually judge one person from another for being unstable.
Yeah, and I've been to plenty of houses where, strangely enough, the last 2 4th of Julys, I was at almost an identical call. The 2018 and 2017, where a couple came home from being out at a party and celebrating the 4th of July. They got into an argument, and both occasions he took a gun, he put it to his head, and killed himself.
Yeah.
Now, was he mentally ill? To me, if you kill yourself, there's probably an issue there. Would he have seen a doctor, and a doctor would have said, "Yes, you're mentally ill"? No, I don't think so. I think that was an impulsive action, and completely outside the, you know, what this intent is. And there will always be.
We've gone to the front doors and found a 12-gauge
Yeah.
shotgun looking at us.
Yeah.
Joseph, I think you had a question. Dave, you have one too? Next.
So I'm going to lead into this a little bit. First thing is I haven't heard anybody say it, so thank you for your years of service. I appreciate you being out there, putting your life on the line for all of us so that we don't have to. So thank you very much. I'm going to comment that I appreciate where you're coming from and that you put trust in the government, but I would argue that the system we have is as good as it is because the architects of that system precisely did not trust the government. And as such, I don't feel like I should either. And while I want to be able to trust judges and I want to be able to trust law enforcement, we have the rights we have because we shouldn't. And my question is really, with the incidents that you cite, Parkland, Sandy Hook, I mean, there are various laws that were either not enforced or were ignored. Communication didn't happen. It seems to me that we would want to fix the system we may or may not be enforced. So what is the benefit of implementing new laws until we know, once implemented, how the existing laws would function?
And there are lots of opportunities. I mean, you can go through the law books. I don't know if there's any attorneys here, but if you go to an attorney's office, there are rows and rows and rows. We have lots and lots of laws on our books, and some we don't enforce, and some are so antiquated. You know, there is a law in Nebraska that you can't, you know, keep a muskrat near a game hole. You know, we need to have that on the books. We still do, but you know, I don't know that we need to. Or it's a ferret. It's not a muskrat. Sorry.
Carry your car.
In answer to the question specifically, to me and the writers of the bill and other people in other states, obviously because it's passed in all those other states, this is a particular niche, and could it be manipulated by an angry ex-spouse? Yes, perhaps, just like Rod said, and it wouldn't have to be something that, you know, a judge has to be cognizant of and make sure that he doesn't allow that to happen. I'm sure now that we have protection orders in place, but there's a lot of protection orders where I think a judge should grant a protection order to a young lady because she's in fear of this guy and he doesn't do it. And that's up to the judge. In the same token, I think this is a particular niche where it would give us the ability to remove a weapon, a firearm, from somebody in a particular time until either they calm down and are no longer violent or they get mental health treatment because they haven't done anything criminal at this point. And there's, at best, if I do an EPC on somebody, emergency protective custody, I take them to, if there's a mental health bed available, they'll go to a manual hospital for 72 hours. Very, very, very few of those people are committed long-term care. Most of them are all released after the 72 hours and said, here's the therapist that you should call, and you should really start therapy, and you should be on these antipsychotic drugs. And until that happens, a lot of people don't stay on antipsychotic drugs, because those drugs, when you start taking them, they have immediate negative effects. But there's not a therapeutic effect for maybe 30 or 60 days. And until that happens, why do you want to stay on these drugs if you even have the money to pay for the drugs to start with? So during that interim period, before they get into the therapeutic period, they've seen the therapist, they're on the medication, do you want that person to be at home with his rifles and his guns and just sitting there going through a psychotic episode? I don't think that's the best way. I certainly understand exactly what you're saying. I've read the Federalist Papers. I understand the Constitution. I've studied that. I have my degree in criminal justice, and I understand exactly what they were doing and what they were trying to get away from and why they constructed the Constitution in a particular way they did. And then we had to amend it from time to time because it wasn't an absolute perfect document when they started. So we've amended it as we've gone along over the course of the years. I don't want to see an amendment to the Constitution because I think that is such a huge, broad thing to do for this particular finite issue that we're talking about. I hope that answered your question. I have no idea.
That's all right. I had a long lead in.
I know, and he lost me halfway through the lead in. So I don't know, Rod, if you had anything that you wanted to address.
No, I mean, just in response to or a compliment, I suppose, what you're saying. The existing emergency protective custody, emergency things that you're able to implement today, the tools that you currently have available, are generally a short-term deal. I mean, 72 hours, maybe a week, and it's a very short-term duration unless it goes back in front of a judge and something further happens. The problem with the red flag laws is because the judge gets to make a determination without you present, you have 14 days from that time that is done to petition, to say I disagree. And if you don't petition within that 14-day window, or you do and you fail in your argument, this is in effect for a full year. And a 1-year impact on losing your rights is a big difference between that and a temporary situation where somebody may have an issue that is temporary in nature. That's my only point on that, is pointing out the difference.
David, you had a question, I believe?
Yeah, I was curious within the proposed red flag law, what is the burden of proof that a specific claim of threat needs to meet in order for a judge to determine that valid and move forward with the sanction?
With LB 58, the bill in front of Nebraska, as well as many of the states that this language was pulled from, it is not the level that you would expect in a criminal case. It is the level that you would see in a civil case, and that is just a preponderance of evidence. And it's difficult to counter that and get a fair balance if only one side is being presented.
Essentially, a preponderance of the evidence is, it doesn't say in law what that is. It's essentially 51%. So it's just enough to sway the argument one side or another. Like Rod said, it's not beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a difference. It's a different amount.
We've got 3 more questions. I'll start with Blake Nelson.
So some of these other states that have passed these type of laws have further expanded it to where neighbors can call you in. And there have been situations in which someone innocently was shot because the cops kicked down his door in order to take his guns, and the first thing he did upon his door being kicked down was to grab the nearest firearm and then shot. What's to prevent the laws from going to this far to where you're guilty until proven innocent, which is the opposite of what we found in the law?
So, is your question against furthering the law, or what?
Yeah, because it's a slippery slope, and once one thing gets passed, it's easier for the law to be extended. And I mean, I'm sure most people have probably had a disagreement at one point or another with their neighbor, and if your neighbor happens to be mad at you and calls you in, it makes a convincing enough case, you know, that you can lose your rights without being guilty. And that's, we were founded upon innocent until proven guilty, and that it was better for a guilty man to walk away innocent than an innocent man to be locked away.
So really, it would be up to the legislature if they wanted to, if LB 58 is passed, to then further expand that. That would be the catch in it. It's what the legislature wanted to do and what they wanted to pass. I think they would have to see that in itself, as if it passes, that it's effective as it is written or modified and then passed, and then see also a need to expand upon it. Personally, I wouldn't be in favor of an expansion like you're talking about, or he mentioned, oh, my neighbor says I say weird things or whatever it is. You know, the neighbor doesn't have the intimate knowledge that somebody that's living with you has, a parent, a child, a spouse, or the investigative abilities that law enforcement have to take that to the court. But ultimately, it would be up to the legislature if they wanted to expand it.
Terry, do you have questions?
I do. This all sounds like pie in the sky, and we already have a problem with our mental health care in this country. How is this going to affect your personnel? Because you guys have a hard enough time keeping up with what you already have on your plate without adding to it. You know, like he says, if somebody turns you in, they obviously have to do some kind of background check in order to validate what is happening, and our personnel is just not there.
No, and we don't have. I have 5 warrants deputies that work currently for me, and we have hundreds and hundreds of warrants. And we have to prioritize those and take the most serious ones as they come. The way this is written and the reality of this,
So you're still going to miss a handful no matter how
well,
perfect the system is.
we have an well, yeah, there'll always be people that fall through because the guy lives in the Woodman Tower in an apartment by himself, and nobody knows that he's crazy. And he's got a dash of weapons up there, and nobody knows. He doesn't talk to anybody. He's a complete hermit. So yeah, we would miss that person because nobody knows, and there is nobody to even start this process. He doesn't have a spouse, a child, anybody. So yeah, there's still going to be people. But to me, if I can take the Parkland shooter and prevent him from doing that and saving those lives, I think it's worth it. I certainly understand what he said, you know, to let a guilty person walk away rather than put an innocent person behind bars. I 100% agree with that. But I also think that, you know, an 8-year-old should be able to go to school and not have to worry about somebody coming in with an AK-47 and killing him and 26 of his schoolmates. So if there's something that we can do to prevent that from happening, I think as adults it's our obligation.
And see, in that instance, those guns weren't his.
All right,
They were his parents, his mother's.
she bought them for him.
We have one last question from Kenneth, and then we're going to have a legally binding vote.
Thank you both for coming tonight. I have a question. You brought up the active shooter in schools and keeping kids safe. Can you say, with this red flag law in a situation, it seems like a lot of these school shootings are by children. Do those children own the gun? And in those cases where they don't, that their parents don't, would this red flag law do any protection at all? Would it give them, say a teacher realizes that my child is off somewhere and says, oh, we got a problem here, would that then give law enforcement enough justification to come take my guns, who I legally own and may have protected, or does that not apply?
The way that it's written, it doesn't allow me to come and seize, or doesn't tell the court to seize your weapons because your son is doing something because he lives with you. And in both Parkland, Florida, and Sandy Hook, his mom bought the guns in Sandy Hook and gave them to him. Parkland, Florida, he bought the rifle himself. It was legal for him to buy, and he went out and bought the rifle himself. Most of the time they're obtained legally. They're not going out and breaking into gun stores and stealing weapons to do these mass shootings. So
Lee has outranked me and wants one last question.
The word red flag comes along because in every one of the cases of the shootings across the United States, they say there were red flags that people should have noticed and done something about. So what can be done about it when we do notice a red flag, which really is the red flag law is talking about? Somebody is dangerous or looks dangerous. What is the answer?
You know, I think that depends on the scenario. The school shootings have been a common topic. And I am not well versed in all of the resources that are available, therefore can't talk about resources that should be available to assist with mental health. But I believe that school staff and counselors should have more resources available and should feel more comfortable in approaching using those resources. But if we're talking about domestic violence situations, that's a completely different situation. And you know, a lot of that is education and teaching people how they can safely remove themselves from an environment. I mean, a regular protection order is worthless because it's just a piece of paper and don't stop anyone. And can sometimes, in many cases, can make it worse. I mean, as soon as you file a protection order against the guy that's beating you, it may push him over the edge and, you know, you end up dead. So, I mean, everything is just so situational dependent. I don't think there's an easy answer. But I think there's many situations that occur where somebody may be suicidal, somebody dealing with a temporary issue. Friends and family need to be more involved in working with the person that's under duress and maybe volunteer to take the weapons and put them in my own home temporarily while you're dealing with this. I had a family member that wanted to quit smoking and they went on that Chantix or whatever. I mean, that's one of the known side effects, as with so many pharmaceuticals, is it can cause some depression. We wanted to get the firearms out of the house for the duration of being on that for 30 days. There's a lot of things that we can do without getting the government involved, but we also need to evaluate what programs and resources are readily available for people to utilize. And somebody needs to take the politics out of this and do a true root cause analysis to figure out where are our failings so that we can truly, honestly approach addressing those instead of trying to make it an R versus D type of an issue.
And it's not a single issue. If I talk to somebody with the NFOA, they will say it's a mental health issue. All these active shooters, it's a mental health issue. We need better mental health. And if I talk to somebody in the mental health, they'll say, nope, it's guns. We need to ban all guns. Well, we're never going to do that. It's a little bit of people that have access to guns, and it's we don't have enough mental health, and it's the way the media portrays and covers these stories by putting the Boston bomber on the front page of Rolling Stone and making him famous. It's splashing their names across the TV and not the victims' names and pictures. Every time that there is a mass shooting, the Omaha World-Herald will run an article on it, and there will be a column along the side, and it'll be the worst shootings in the U.S. history, and it'll have the date and the location and the body count. And it tells the person that grew up on violent video games, wow, if I want to be on this column, I have to beat this score, and the score is currently, 58, Las Vegas. So if I want to be more famous than the guy from Las Vegas, that's what I have to do.
Copycat.
So, I mean, it's not one thing. It's certainly not banning guns, and we're not ever going to, and we shouldn't, because it's one of the foundations of our country.
I want to thank our speakers. Thank you. On both sides, things that I hadn't thought of before. So we'll just do a show of hands. Who would be in favor of the red flag law as we've heard about it today? 2 hands?
3.
3 hands. And who is against?
Vote early, vote often.
I saw a couple hands go up twice. Thank you very much for attending. Please grab a drink and start heading in. We're going to have dinner. Gentlemen, we'd love to have you join us for dinner if you can. Thank you for speaking.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I hope you